Well, it's an honor to be here at Centennial Hall, working for K2. I want to give a really great thanks to our star producer, Ms. Grace Elliott, over there by the door, putting the show together. And the whole staff of K2, Jamie Waste, Jeff Brown, Susan Fitzgerald, Katie Helt. And can I hear it one time for Fort James playing the bass? And how about for Alan Wicks on the drums? And Mr. Steve Nelson on the keys playing for you. My name's Justin Smith, and we got Doc Washington in the house, all the way here from Phoenix to sing for you. And stick around, folks, because we're playing all night. Here we go. it's an honor to be here at Centennial Hall, working for K2. I want to give a really great thanks to our star producer, Grace Elliott, over there by the door, putting the show together. The whole staff of K2, Jamie Waste, Jeff Brown, Susan Fitzgerald, Katie Helt. And can I hear it one time for Fort James playing the bass? And how about for Alan Wicks on the drums? And Mr. Steve Nelson on the keys playing for you. My name's Justin Smith, and we got Doc Washington in the house, all the way here from Phoenix to sing for you. And stick around, folks, as we're playing all night.
All right, good evening. Welcome to our second of 3 community town hall events on the school start time. I'm Sven Gustafson. I am the Chief Academic Officer for the Anchorage School District, and we have a couple of our school board members in the audience. Member Kelly Lessons is here, as is member Andy Holloman, so welcome to the two of you. This evening you're going to hear about a lot about school start times and some different options that are being kicked around for school start times. And then we will also get into a little bit about PLCs, which are professional learning communities, which is another thing that we're proposing to the school board as an option for next year. And so tonight we have Shannon Bingham, who's with Western Demographics. He is a person that does a lot of this work around the country. And Dr. Kirsten Johnson-Strumpler will talk about the PLC piece with you. She is the Senior Director of Secondary Education now and the former South High School principal. So she's back home here this evening. So we're going to go ahead and get it kicked off. Shannon will start it off this evening. At the end of the presentation, you'll have opportunity to make any statements, ask any questions that you have, and we'll go ahead and get it kicked off. So Shannon.
Great. Thank you, Sven. Just structure of the evening, we'll go through this presentation and this material, and then we have a couple of floor mics, and we'd like to invite everybody to step forward who would like to make a statement or ask a question. There are a lot of people in the room who are highly qualified to answer questions, so we'd like to make sure that you have an opportunity to do that while we're all here. We are limiting statements to about 3 minutes, and MJ will be our timekeeper on questions. So with that, I will go ahead and launch into the presentation. So the school start time issue has been very much at the forefront of American education for almost 18 years now. There's been a lot of conversation about student wellness issues, especially exiting the pandemic, and a lot of districts around the US and Canada have been exploring changing their start times to offer students some sort of a wellness benefit, given the fact that we have a lot of students that are emerging from the pandemic troubled. In 2014, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommended that US middle and high schools start at or after 8:30, and that has been very much a kind of a touchstone for a lot of districts that have considered this issue. A lot of folks that we network with in the medical community, whether they are sleep doctors, pediatricians, physicians, assistants, nurses, are very much in touch with a lot of children that have sleep issues and fatigue issues and wellness issues in general, and a lot of them are very much in favor of us taking some sort of action on this issue. So that's been one of the things that a lot of districts have considered. When we change school start times away from the traditional schedules that have existed in a lot of districts since the 50s or the 60s, we're finding that students are more likely to get the recommended amount of sleep for their age category. So for elementary age students, that is over 10 hours, for middle school students over 9 hours, and for high school students a little over 8 hours. So a lot of the school start time strategy has been to try to figure out a way for as many children as possible to get the recommended amount of sleep for their age category. There are a lot of benefits that are measurable that flow from making a change. So with sleep duration increases, we see decreased amounts of daytime sleepiness, increased attendance and graduation rates, less tardiness, higher GPAs, other health outcomes that we'll talk about in a moment, and fewer automobile crashes for high school age drivers. So there have been both national studies by insurance underwriters addressing the safety aspects of high school students having being better, more well rested when they're driving early in the morning, and we're seeing that after we have changes, we have some significant improvements in that regard. And we have a longitudinal study that we will share with you tonight that also measured that using accident rates for teens collected by that county sheriff's department, and they found that there was a significant improvement from a safety standpoint for children in this age category. A lot of districts between about 2014 and the start of the pandemic changed their start times. There was kind of a rash of exploration of this issue at that time. We actually explored that as well in 2018. I hosted probably 45 events in the spring of 2018, whether they were focus groups or open houses or town halls similar to this one, all over the district addressing this issue. There is both pro and con research on this topic. So some researchers feel that the amount of effort and the amount of change associated with changing start times that have been the way that they are for decades is not worth the benefit. Others believe strongly that it is. There are some researchers that believe the effects of putting elementary school students in this first starting position is detrimental because not all elementary children are morning people. But we do have a lot of research, both from various well-known researchers and from our own anecdotals, that because elementary children go to bed at 7:30, 7:45, they rise early, their energy band for school, when they're most able to learn, starts earlier than it does for other students. And we hear anecdotals from a lot of our elementary school teachers saying that kids are starting to bunk by about 1:30, and that between 1:30 and 3:30, they're a little bit less able to learn and a little bit less effective in class and a little bit more likely to be drowsy. Others argue that a lot of our families have trouble getting elementary age children to school at 9, and if we were to shift that to 8 a.m., that we would have even more pronounced problems with tardiness and attendance if we asked those families to get those children to school even earlier. So there's pro and con points of view on a variety of these issues, but the key issues are that we believe because elementary school students rise early and tire by mid-afternoon, an earlier start could be beneficial. There's an extensive amount of university research and research hospital studies indicating improvements in middle and high school student performance and wellness given later start times. We now are experiencing a second wave of school start time changes because of districts that are exiting from the pandemic are searching for a way to offer students a student wellness benefit, given the fact that a lot of students are pretty dinged up as a result of the pandemic, given a lot of the shifting in and out of in-person and virtual learning environments, a lot of the emotional trauma associated with the pandemic, and a lot of the disruption and movement around the country that a lot of families have experienced. And some districts and some folks that look at family issues broadly are suggesting that this might be a good time to make a change. Others are suggesting that we've changed enough and let's not change anything else. So there are two perspectives on a variety of these issues. The RAND Corporation is a big insurance underwriting agency, and they've indicated or conducted a national study demonstrating that high school student safety could improve significantly with later start times. At the university and hospital level, there are two prominent researchers that have worked on this issue for well over 2 decades. Dr. Kyla Wallstrom at the University of Minnesota has been very helpful to this district and other districts all over the country in addressing these issues. And Dr. Lisa Meltzer, formerly with the National Jewish Hospital Network, which is another big research hospital network nationally, has also conducted a significant amount of work in this, on this issue. And she has actually addressed our board directly about 2 months ago on this issue. As far as pros and cons of some of the individual alternatives, you see a list of these here. The pros, many of those I've already gone over. The student performance benefits are most tangible first period. So the first thing that the researchers do is they look at first period grades and they look at first period alertness. And I don't know how many of you have ever taught a class first period in a high school setting or conducted a focus group first period with 60 high school students, but that's not a great time to be a high school student. So, and I'm not saying that everybody is fast asleep, but that's a challenging time. Depending upon how you want to master schedule your building. You don't want to teach AP Physics first period. You probably don't want to teach pre-calculus first period. Those are classes that are probably better offered in the heart of the day. So a lot of people that are scheduling high school content are really looking at when are kids at their best to take some of those significantly advanced classes. Other issues on the con side, obviously making a living as a school teacher is a challenging proposition, especially now with housing costs and a lot of the other things that are facing families. And this would be a major change that would not only affect every family in the district, it would also affect the majority of our staff people as far as when their workday might start and end. And for some of our staff, they would just be looking at a shuffle. So for example, our bus drivers would have more or less the same schedule. They would just be moving a different group of children at a different time of day. Other issues, military families have observed that because elementary school students start later, that hour or 45 minutes in the morning is their quality time with their elementary age children. And that if we pull school start times earlier, in order to take advantage of those children being alert, they would lose that time with their child and would have to spend more time on the weekend with their students because many of them don't really get home until 6:45 or 7, which is just about bedtime for an elementary age child. Other pros and cons there, we have a lot of weather impacted bus routes here in Anchorage. A lot of the research on this topic was obviously conducted in the lower 48, and so there is a bit of an argument that some of these issues are not appropriate here, given our snowbound and darkness impacted wintertime. And others, especially in the medical community, are saying this is even more appropriate for the research based on what it is saying, given the conditions here in Alaska. Other issues are a lot of the research that was conducted in northern and central Minnesota is not exactly a similar climate to us, but there are some similarities. And a lot of the northern tier districts that have made changes have been working with morning pool time and morning ice time for swimmers and skaters and trying to make sure they could accommodate many of those programs as possible. Some of the other districts, including the longitudinal study that I will show you, are significantly traffic impacted. And so they may not have snow and ice to cope with, but a lot of urban areas, as people have transitioned more towards urbanized settings and less folks reside in rural areas, traffic in a lot of our bigger cities has become a pretty significant issue. Nevertheless, we have 45 minutes between our start times, and we are struggling with our transportation needs to try to figure out a way to maybe compress that, because a lot of the districts that have had the easiest time of changing start times have compressed what we call the window, which is the time between high school start, middle school start, and elementary start. So when that is between 8 and 9 o'clock, you tend to alleviate a lot of the concerns associated with making a change. Some of the bigger districts that have huge central business districts and have pretty much low tax impacts when they have a bond election or a mill levy pretty much had a mill levy to raise money for additional buses and additional drivers, and tried to solve the window compression problem by basically throwing money at it. We are less able to do that. And as we listen very carefully to our drivers, our dispatchers, our routers and schedulers in trying to understand what their day looks like when they're behind the wheel of that bus, we are learning that that 45 minutes is more or less essential. We think that there may be some management things that we could do to compress that a little bit, but we know that that would take some time, it would take some training, and it would take some modification of loading process and unloading process to try to get kids on and off of buses at school sites. And those are things that we would have to address carefully. So that's kind of some of the bigger picture pros and cons. Coming back to kind of the history lesson, you can see kind of how we started this. We started with a 3,000 signature petition from a high school student that really initiated the board directing the administration to explore this issue. I was hired in December of 2017 to help the district explore this issue. And in the spring of 2018, we actually ran those 45 events and came up with a final scenario that instead of starting high school at 7:30, we would start at 8 a.m. And so in that scenario, we put high school still in the first position, but we more or less rolled everything back 30 minutes and put middle school in last position. Now, as part of that conversation, we were talking about what some of the other districts that have middle school last have done, which is sponsor a 45 or 50-minute morning study hall, either in the cafeterias or the libraries, that would be proctored by a teacher on special assignment or an extra duty contract, where there would be the ability for families with elementary and middle school children that they are attempting to drop at school simultaneously, where the middle school children could be dropped early and they would be in a warm setting where they could work on homework, prepare for quizzes and exams, and maybe have a little bit of help if they have questions or need anything. Several districts around the country have done that, and I know of one district that has 7 of them in process at 7 middle schools. And we get 45 or 50 kids every morning that come in early and take advantage of the study hall. So that was one thing that we considered as part of the 2018 proposal. Here are the scenarios that we started with. We started with scenarios that stuck with a 7:30 start time. So our current scenario has the 45-minute windows. So you see we had high school at 7:30, middle school at 8:15, elementary school at 9 o'clock. So in the first scenario, we switched high school and elementary school. And that's what's called going research compliant, when you put elementary in first place and high school in last place. High school students are basically not getting enough sleep pervasively around the country in districts that have traditional start order. And so the leading feature of a lot of this research is to put high school students either in the second or the last position, so that their circadian rhythm is more aligned with when school starts. A lot of people have said high school students will just cheat. And as long as high school students are not addicted to devices or have other issues that result in some sort of a sleep-challenged environment, for the most part, if they're starting school later, they're sleeping later and they're getting the sleep. And the several longitudinal studies have determined that middle and high school kids don't goof around in the morning. They sleep in the morning. So when you have a later start time, what we're finding is that in most cases, not every case, not every child, but for students who are kind of in that middle grouping between kids who are addicted to a device and are in bed with some sort of a web-enabled tablet or phone when they shouldn't be, and other students who are hyper-motivated, bound out of bed at 6 a.m. every morning, or are military families or highly structured kids that are in multiple activities. The students in the middle are the ones that we have been the most able to help. And we are finding that there is a true benefit to students in that category when they start school later. Our second scenario there was to push everything back 15 minutes. So we went with the research compliant solution, and we pushed that back mostly to get elementary school students in school a little bit later. Instead of 7:30, they would be in at 7:45. And then the last scenario there switched the high school and the middle school students and put high school students in second position so that they could be more likely to participate in after-school sports, extracurricular activities, or an after-school job. We did a study using comparable districts in Spokane, Boise, Eugene, Bellingham, and Tacoma, and I think Fairbanks, and found that we have about the same rate of high school employment as those 6 districts in that sample. We have a lot of young men and women that are sharing with us that they have a role in supporting their families, meaning high school age students who are part of the breadwinning structure of their families. So we have been very careful to respect the fact that they want to protect their ability to remain employed. We went out and met with the Chamber of Commerce on that issue, and the Chamber said, we don't really see an economic impact in Anchorage to changing start times, given the need to have student labor available, and that we would rather have healthy kids. So we did hear that message from the Anchorage Chamber in 2018. As we heard concerns about extracurriculars, athletics, after-school jobs, we also heard that a lot of high school students are responsible for younger siblings, and that after their high school day, they go pick up a younger sibling, elementary age student, in their own vehicle, take that child home, and provide afternoon childcare. So that was one thing that suggested some compromise scenarios, and I'll show those to you in just a moment. Here are some of the detailed pros and cons. I think I've touched on the majority of these already, but for the most part, a lot of these were observed in detail, and we had individual parents and groups of parents that were very much affected by one of these issues. So we developed some compromise scenarios. So again, here you see our current scenarios on the top. And then the recommendation was for high school to start at 8 a.m. instead of 7:30. So we kept high school in position 1, but we pushed it back half an hour. So that was a half-hour improvement in the possible sleep volume for those students. They would get out at 2:30. We have a 6.5-hour academic day. And then elementary was going to be second. Elementary would start at 8:45 and release at 3:15. So you see on the ending time, those high school students that were getting out at 2:30 could loop around in a vehicle and go pick up a younger sibling who would be released at 3:15. And then we put the middle school students in last position starting at 9:30. And that was research compliant because it was after that 8:30 window. There was another scenario developed where we put elementary back in first position, which would be research compliant. High school at 8:45, middle school at 9:30, and both high school and middle school would be research compliant under that scenario, and elementary students would be starting at 8 o'clock. And you see that there is a gap where the elementary students would be, if they're being supervised by an older sibling, there's a 45-minute gap there between when the high school student would be available to pick up the elementary school student, not counting travel time for that student to get from high school to the elementary. So it would probably be at least an hour gap there. Scenario 4 was preferred by the board at that time, but they chose not to take action. And part of the reason was concern about the 30 minutes of high school sleep benefit possibly not being worth the magnitude of the change. So that was kind of the state of affairs at that point. I'm sure there were some other factors. My memory is challenged by a lot of water under the bridge, but I'm basically just kind of talking a little bit about how we process the issue. The 8 o'clock start is something that seems more amenable for the elementary school community. What that does is it triggers a 9:30 start for middle school students. And so that really sets us up to where the middle school study halls would be a pretty important piece of the equation. So longitudinal studies, this study was called Castles. It was actually run by Dr. Meltzer and Dr. Wallstrom. So they were hired by Cherry Creek School District to do pre-change and post-change research on a large group of students. I think they had 5,000 students involved in the sample in the research project. So a huge group of kids. This district did a research compliance switch. They did this right in the middle of the bus driver crisis, so they had some transportation challenges. This is a highly traffic impacted school district. When I'm working in this area, I avoid it like the plague because of the likelihood of getting stuck somewhere and sitting there for 20 minutes in a traffic jam. They moved their high school start time from 7:10 a.m. to 8:20 a.m. and they put their elementary school students in first position, moving them from a 9 a.m. start to an 8 a.m. start. And what this district experienced was just like playing country music backwards, where you get your wife back, you get your job back, you get your truck back. All of the benefits from the research that they were expecting, they obtained when they made the change. So basically we had the elementary students that went from 9 a.m. to an 8 a.m. start only got 1 minute less sleep than they were getting before. So the impact on elementary school students was nominal. At the middle school level, the average middle school student got 29 more minutes sleep than they were getting before, and 1 in 5 middle school students was getting more likely to get the recommended amount of sleep than they did before. So it helped 1 in 5 middle school students. The high school level, the average high school student in the study got 45 minutes more sleep, and 33% of those students in the study wound up getting the recommended amount of sleep. So 1 in 3 additional students wound up getting the recommended amount of sleep. There were other depression and wellness behavior benefits associated with the study per 1,000 students interviewed. At the elementary level, there were some impacts. So 24 out of 1,000 elementary students cited being tired during the academic day, and 20 cited being sleepy during the academic day versus the response level before the change, okay? So about 2% impact on elementary kids. At the middle school level, 83 out of 1,000 fewer cited being tired, and 59 fewer cited being sleepy, and there were other benefits in the sad, nervous, and worried categories as well. So there was a 6 to 8% improvement for middle school students on some of those wellness behaviors. And at the high school level, you see big numbers, 187 fewer students citing being tired and 207 fewer students out of 1,000. So that's about 1 in 5 cited being not being sleepy. After the change, a fewer amount were sleepy. As far as other indicators, first period, students who cited being ready for school, being alert, being prepared, participating. The middle school level improvements were 4 to 8%. At the high school level, improvements were 11 to 17% pre to post study. At the middle level, about 8% of students cited being less able to participate in after-school athletics, and that was more pronounced for girls. So there were some impacts at the middle school level. At the high school level, only 2% of students were less likely to participate in athletics. Now, this is a brighter environment than Anchorage, meaning it's at a lower latitude and there's a lot more late afternoon and early evening light in the middle of the wintertime. And so a little bit different circumstances than what we have here. Activities, 3% fewer middle school students were able to participate, 1% fewer high school students. And regarding employment, 7% of high school students said they were more able to participate in an after-school job, mostly because they were well rested and they still had the energy to go do something else after school. So there were some improvements there associated with the change in start time that were unexpected. First period grades improved by about 1.5% to about 3.5% for the middle and high school students respectively. And there were other improvements in academic performance, but most of the benefits were really measured in terms of wellness. We had kids running up to us at basketball games saying how much better their family atmosphere was now that there was less conflict over getting out of bed in the morning. And the anecdotals on that topic are profound, even though it's very difficult to measure, and you're not going to get a university study on family atmosphere after a school change. But for the most part, we have had over and over and over again people comment on how this change affected their family climate because there was less conflict over getting out of bed in the morning, because kids were more likely to be well rested. So that's the quick look at the start time issue. We will have some questions. We'll answer your questions on that and on the PLC issue, and I'd like to introduce Kirsten Johnson to talk about the PLC.
All right, thank you, Shannon. So good evening, everyone. I was introduced at the beginning, but my name's Kirsten Johnson. I'm the Senior Director of Secondary Education, former principal and teacher for the school district as well. One of the other, before I get started, I wanted to recognize that our board president arrived. So Margot Bellamy is in the audience as well, in addition to Kelly Lessons and Andy Hallman from the school board. Before I get started, though, I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about professional learning communities. In addition to the school start time schedule change, we're looking at professional learning communities for all of our teachers. If you're a current high school parent, you're fairly used to that schedule. And professional learning communities essentially is a time once a week for our educators and our staff to engage in the ability to collaborate together over professional topics. And when educators have that ability, they're more effective when they have that face-to-face time with students in the classroom. And so in addition to the start times that Shannon has outlined, we're proposing a late start Monday for all of our schools from preschool through 12th grade. And like I said, this is an existing practice at high school across our district already, but we would expand it to middle and elementary. So I'll go through the bullets a little bit, more specifically. So one of the big advantages for professional learning communities for our educators is the ability to address some major initiatives in our district. College Career Life Ready initiative is one of our main goals at the secondary level at this point, and it would provide time to really expand on that work. It also supports a number of curriculum adoptions that we have going, and at the elementary level in particular, it would allow us to focus on reading, which is really an essential skill I think everybody can agree needs to happen at the elementary level, and it allows our educators the time to really work on those curriculum adoptions around reading and math to get our kids with those basic skills. It also really lets us address some of the social emotional needs of our students so that we can support them more readily throughout their day. And especially after a pandemic, we've found that this is really essential for us in our school system. So there's definitely a lot of research around professional learning communities in the education world. It's not a new concept when it comes to schools and education, and it's been around for roughly about 20 years. And even within our district, there have been individual schools that have implemented PLCs as individual communities. Diamond High School was the first in our district in 2006, and many other schools have followed them to get where we are at this point in time. And what we have found with those individual schools over time is that it is really effective for those individual schools, and now would like to expand it to our entire district. And so essentially, I'm not following these slides, I'm just kind of talking, but we definitely would like to let all of our educators engage in that professional time so that they can improve student outcomes. That's really the basis of PLCs, is getting student outcomes to increase and allowing the professionals to have that time to work on it. And so when we are doing a professional learning community proposal that we just talked to the board about actually this week, we would really like to stay with a late start on Monday and implement in the fall of 24. So that's really our proposal right now, but it coincides with the school start time. And sorry, 23 is when we would implement. It's wrong on that slide. So we would look at implementing this coming fall, late start Mondays across the board, which essentially means school would start 1 hour later on Mondays only, and then you would have your regular schedule for the rest of the week. A number of the reasons for doing it on a Monday have to do with in-service days that typically fall on a Friday. And we also have a lot more sports and activities and school activities in general at all levels that go into the latter part of the week. So Mondays tends to be a better day just from a scheduling standpoint. And so that's really a summary of what we're proposing for PLCs, is to allow our educators for that 60 minutes on Mondays, right at the beginning of the day, and school would start an hour later that day, so our educators have that collaboration time during that additional hour in the mornings. So I'm going to turn it back over to Shannon to kind of close us out.
So here's an example of how the existing scenarios would be affected 1 day a week on Mondays if we made the change that Kirsten just mentioned. So you can see our current start times at the top for high school, middle school, and elementary. If we do nothing on school start times, we would start an hour later, so high school would start at 8:30, middle school would start at 9:15, and elementary school would start at 10. There would not be a change for the release time. So that would be a 5.5 hour academic day for students on those days. So that would be the approach there. For the various scenarios, 1 day a week, here are scenarios 1, 2, 3, and 3, and what that Monday start would be. So you see that under scenario 2, the start for elementary would be 8:45, middle school would be 9:30, and high school would be 10:15. Moving on to scenario 4, which was the 2018 recommendation. On Mondays, the PLC start time would be 9 o'clock for high school, 9:45 for elementary school, and 10:30 for middle school. So those would be the adjustments for clipping off that 1 hour Monday morning. And again, there would not be a change for release time. That would remain standard. So we have a survey. I have it up in 4 languages. I have English, Spanish, Korean, and Tagalog. And this is the survey that is online. You can point your smartphone at this and take the survey from your seat right now, and that would be our preference. I can make the English version of this real big if you can't get it from where you're sitting. Just let me know if you want me to toggle back and forth. But the survey takes about 5 minutes, and it gives us a record of your thoughts on this issue, your support or opposition to us making a change on start time. We do not have survey material on PLC. So if you have a point of view on PLC, we'd like you to share that with us via the community participation option that we have coming up. So with that, we'd like to thank you for your participation and attendance tonight. Thank you for participating in the survey, and ask you to come forward if you have questions or comments for the team. And I'm going to read everyone's names off of this list that MJ has just handed me. And we will start with Paul Williamson, followed by Kathy Brown.
Good evening. My name's Paul Williamson. I'm a parent, also happen to be a psychologist, former Air Force psychologist, so I have some experience with the military community as well. And so the basic crux to my comment would be I would support any measure which would be research compliant and move these middle school and high school start times a bit later. For the audience, I would say I know that sometimes there's a perception that lack of sleep that sometimes high school and middle school students get is because of bad habits. I will not deny that bad habits are absolutely a contributing factor, but they're an exacerbating factor. They're not the only factor. And being able to move school start times, the research is pretty robust in that that does have meaningful gains. And in my clinical work, I will say that the vast majority of individuals I work with a mental health concern, whether adolescent or adult, sleep is a highly correlated factor, whether it's with anxiety or depression or whatever the case may be. And you can make the argument whether that's cause or symptom, but in either case, whether cause or symptom, it's usually a little bit reciprocal. Being able to take measures that will give the opportunity to improve sleep has a meaningful impact. And so for that reason also, I would endorse moving start times a bit later for the middle school and high school students.
Thank you, Paul. We're trying to access local medical professionals on this issue. If you wouldn't mind leaving your contact information as you leave tonight, I'd love to chat with you on the phone at some point.
Sure. I did have a corresponding question, and that was with a 4 o'clock, potential 4 o'clock release time for middle school students, if you've considered the impact that could have in terms of maybe promoting some bad habits that we worry about in terms of sleep hygiene and things like that in the evening hours because of the pressure it puts on the evening schedule. And if so, if you've had any thoughts what those were, particularly in terms of after-school programming. Thank you.
Thanks. One thing that we have been exploring is trying to compress the transportation window so that we could move middle school release maybe to 3:50 if we went with the 2 compromise scenarios that I showed you toward the end of the presentation. We're trying to mitigate that, but we're finding that our drivers really do need that entire 45 minutes to do their jobs, and especially with Snowmageddon experience. I think everybody's aware of some of the challenges associated with getting around in Anchorage and Eagle River, and some of our rural routes around Eagle River are highly impacted. So at any rate, thank you for your comments. That mic is feeding back. Can we angle it a little bit, Sven? Can you point it at that wall? I think it'll be less prone to feeding back. There we go. Thank you. Go ahead, Kathy.
I get to test it, huh? Hi, Shannon. I have to tell you, you swayed me a little bit this time. I am not against the science. It's valid. It makes sense. But as a high school parent, I'm graduating my third high schooler in 2024. I have students that are athletes, honor students that do very, very well in school because school has been their job from the moment they entered kindergarten. It's expected. It's always been that way in my house. Whether you think it's right or wrong, that's how we've done it. But my concern is the after-school activities and the kids with jobs, and I know you spoke to that. But I would like to see some scenarios. You know, if we go with option A, this is what the activities might look like. If we go with option B, this is what they might look like. My own senior next year, she's worried. She said, you know, they almost cut my sport, and we got it, but now I don't know if I'll be able to go to practice. You know, she's concerned, and I think she has a valid concern. She's earned the right to swim as a senior. She's a good kid, and all of her teammates have earned that right too. So that's my only concern, really. I'm not against it. I'm not. I would just like to see the data and what the plan is, and not be surprised as a parent, and as would many of the athletes in this community that are wondering too, that I've spoken to. And as a school nurse for 18 years, I work at a high school, and I see kids every single day that show up for school because it's soccer season or they have football, and they get good grades because they have to get good grades. And sports is what gets them in the front door of the school. Sure. So it's really, really important for a lot of high schoolers. And then I want to close with, this is an awesome thing. I really, really think it is, but it will not be the fix for our kids' wellness long term. It will help, but we need to continue to work as a community and a district to help our community and kids get what they need and what their families need to be as physically and mentally healthy as possible. And that's not just ASD, that's the entire community as a whole. We all have to work together on that. So just consider the high schoolers, is what I'm asking, and let the parents know. Be transparent. Please, I beg the board, be transparent with us and let us know what's actually going to happen before it happens. I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. So I'd like to partially respond to your question. I'm going to call on Alora Moray to come next, and Caitlin Poindexter to come after Alora. So just to kind of answer your question, what we wanted to do was re-engage the community to determine the overall point of view of the community on this issue post-pandemic and see where we stand. So the main purpose of the survey has been to generically determine where we stand on this issue, show the original scenarios again, show the compromise scenarios again, explain the difference between research compliant and some of the impacts that might result in students having to make changes with sports and extracurriculars or jobs or childcare for elementary students or sibling supervision of elementary students, and then re-engage the compromise scenarios that attempt to address those things using research benefit as the offsetting benefit associated with them. And then it's my job to lay all of that out for the board and say, when you twist this knob and you twist this knob, this happens to this meter and this happens to this meter. And so what we want to do is find out where the board stands on this issue, and then we'll pick a more concise set of scenarios that will have various compromises embedded, and then we'll re-engage the community to figure out where everyone stands in that regard. And I think we will have an opportunity to do some impact assessment on various sports extracurriculars in order to kind of expose what would be the impacts associated with doing certain things. Last time we networked extensively with the 4 largest institutional childcare providers in the Anchorage Bowl and in Eagle River, and we tried to learn as much as we can as far as how everybody would adjust. We can't completely predict the future, but I think we can try to do some situational impact analysis of how things might play out. And I think we want to see what the board would like to do as they decide how they want to move forward. And then I think we'll be doing some of that impact analysis in conjunction with a more concise directive from the board. Great, thank you. Alora. Pardon me? Okay, thank you. Let's see, Caitlin Poindexter. Is Caitlin still here? Oh, here we go.
Thank you, by the way, for this session. I found it really helpful. So as I was listening, are you hearing feedback?
You sound fine.
Okay.
We could try it.
Oh yeah, I might. Walk anyway. Okay, can you hear me? Oh, that's much better. Thank you. I just was trying to listen for what I hadn't heard in the presentation. Well, sure. I thought it's hopeful that you don't have to provide childcare in the morning before school. I think that's pretty awesome because it would just go to the evening if elementary school started earlier. I think that would be very helpful for a lot of parents, actually. Hormones rage in the teenage years and lay dormant in elementary school years, so easier to get cooperation for bedtime routines and wake up in the morning, I think, with an elementary schooler than with a teenager, and I'm sure the psychologist could easily speak to that. Truly. Snow days allowed me to see the afternoon fallout at the elementary level. It was pretty incredible. Actually, I went in every day to my daughter's school, to my twin daughter's school, and saw the classrooms, and I was just like, ooh, this is a hot mess. Like, this is too late for these students. You could see it pretty much in every classroom. It's pretty dramatic. And we needed to do it to make up time, but it was actually helpful. So I don't think later would be good for elementary in the afternoon. I agree with the research. I think it would be nice to have a solid time block after school. Right now I feel like I rush my children to school and rush them home. Also living in Alaska, we go to school in the dark and come home from school in the dark. And I love to play with my kids after school and get them outside and expend energy and that kind of thing. And it would be nice to have some light at 2 o'clock to do that throughout the winter, where high schoolers are a little bit more amenable to doing that themselves. I heard over and over again, health, safety, and developmentally appropriate to move high school later. And I think those are really key elements, right, in education. Like, so that I thought, yeah, that sounds really good. And then I also thought about, my master's degree is in college student services administration, and my specialty was working with freshmen. So I've worked with a lot of 18-year-olds. So I can also speak to them not liking to get up for 8 o'clock classes, majority. And UAA and APU have very few classes on Fridays. And so I thought, and I'm not going to talk too much to the professional learning communities, but I thought having those on Fridays could be really beneficial in terms of having workforce of, like, if you made it a half day on Friday or something like that, you could get college students that could come and work in the elementary schools and help provide childcare. And then I just wanted to ask, please no to the 5-hour school day. When I saw that at the end, 6 hours, there's a half an hour for lunch, a half an hour for recess, which I'm very grateful to Kelly Lessons for fighting for that. But I think that would leave 4 hours of instruction. And I've looked at statistics across the district and proficiency in reading and math. And I think that would be detrimental. Oh yeah, and I was thinking high school students would finish up sports about the time that parents are done with work for pickup. That could be an easier, more seamless flow. So those were things that I noticed and wanted to point out.
Great, thank you so much. So last is David Whittison.
Oh, that was nice. I don't need to repeat my name because he said it. So my question is, how is the district preparing to work with those students that have zone exceptions that will potentially face transportation challenges under the proposed plans?
So zone exemptions,
Well, for example, we're not in South's zone, but my son qualified for a program to attend this school. And so there's no bus routes that will bring him here.
I'm not sure there would be an effect if we change start times on zone exemptions. Sven, can you think through how that might happen?
If I'm not able to bring my son to school, we would have to transfer him to another school that he would have to take the bus to. Is that what I'm understanding?
So I can take that question. Those are some of the impacts we're trying to explore right now, as Shannon indicated through the survey and having town halls. When you do zone exempt your student to another school, it is the parent's responsibility to provide that transportation. That's part of the zone exempt process. So we would need to examine how much that would affect our students in the system.
But David, I think what you're saying is that because of your work schedule, if we change the start time, your child's on a zone exemption, is not getting transportation, and you would be unable to take your child to the school of your choice as a result of the change. Your hours cannot?
I'm a respiratory therapist.
Okay. Right.
Their parents can't take them because there's no exemption, so they're losing out on these great programs that the district advertises, but then can't participate in because they start school at 9 o'clock or whatever on and especially PLCs, it causes that loss.
Yeah, and I think we probably, as we wade into changes of this magnitude, we discover a couple of hundred parents that have the circumstances that you do, where the outcome kind of has a pretty significant impact on what your plans are. And we just have to agree to try to work with parents on an individual basis to try to figure out what we can facilitate. But given our transportation limitations as they are and our inability to get qualified drivers right now to operate the system that we have, we can't really address every solution, but our goal would be to work with every parent individually to figure out if there's a way for us to accommodate every family. And I think our building level people do a pretty good job of that, but it's not possible every time. And I think you should remain involved in this and continue to advocate for your child and observe for policymakers the potential impacts on your family. Thanks. Any other questions or comments tonight? I had 5 people on the list and 1 abstained, and I think we're running a little ahead of time. Anybody else would like to ask a question or make a comment? Yes, ma'am. Right.
And I mean, we've talked about it in school. I just worked third session today, worked till 5. We have kids from the Lower Yukon Custom District coming in and go to school, take CTE classes till 5. This would be detrimental to that if high school can get out till 4, you know, one of those scenarios. I'm just thinking about that out loud, you know. That's something. Well, yeah, it's a big program. Like you said, it's huge, so.
Yeah, and I think that 8 o'clock scenario released high school students at 2:30, but you're correct, some of the others were pretty late. And for students, I guess those students take 4 periods and then they head to CTE in the morning. Is that how that's structured, Finn?
My daughter goes, she's there the morning, South in the morning, and there in the afternoon, or vice versa.
Yeah, we would have to flex some of those schedules in order to accommodate those students.
Hey, we need
Other
one.
questions? Yes, sir.
I had a follow-up question or comment on the professional learning communities, and that's, and I think you kind of addressed this a little bit a moment ago, but I may have blipped out, so forgive me if this is a repeat. For Monday morning late starts, particularly with elementary kids, they are less capable, and some certainly not should not be left unsupervised. And for parents, particularly dual income households where both parents are working in the morning, trying to figure out every week an alternative. And we're looking at potentially a much larger number of parents and children than we would be perhaps for zoning exemptions, which are in of themselves a significant concern. What thought has been given about the impact on working families like that?
I'm not sure I have an answer for your question, but I think that Sven, you want to take a shot at that one?
Yeah, if we were to move to later, change the start times where the elementary kids would be earlier in the day, that Monday wouldn't be much different than what it is now, because they're already starting at 9 o'clock now, so they would be starting. It depends upon what the school board decides as far as the start time for the new start times. That's why we're kind of putting them together. It's kind of elementary. It wouldn't affect the elementary as much. The middle school and high schoolers would be a little later in the day, and they're older and have a little more ways to be able to be on their own and get themselves to school or onto the bus.
Great. Yes, ma'am. We're going to need you on a microphone. We have, since we're simulcasting or webcasting this, we need to make sure we have a record of everybody.
Yeah, I just want to share a comment from my son's perspective. I wasn't going to do this, but I think he'll appreciate it. He's 15. He's a freshman at Service, and he's well supported in school. He does well in his grades. I don't know where to look. And plays sports and has friends, but he says regularly that he hates school. And that just started this year. And it pains me to hear him say that. When I ask him why, he just says, because I have to get up so early. And so I appreciate all the research. I'm supportive of it, but mostly I just want my son not to hate school. And I think he just really needs more sleep. Like, that's really what it boils down to for him. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Other comments before we pull the plug for the evening? Great. Well, thanks everybody for your participation and all your great comments and questions. We really appreciate it. I think that taking the survey is really key. So for anyone who has not done so, it is available on the website, and we would encourage you to participate in that manner. We have a final town hall Friday night at Mirror Lake, 6 p.m. If you have friends or neighbors or you'd like to come see a rerun, you're welcome to join us then as well. And with that, I'll ask you to be careful because I think you're going to walk out into a little bit of a snow event here. So watch out for the ice and have a safe trip home. Thanks, everybody.